What if I told you that the very first signs of dementia aren't actually about forgetfulness? Most of us automatically assume it all starts with misplaced keys or forgotten names. But that is a dangerous and very common misconception. There are quiet, subtle signals that emerge long before memory problems become obvious. These are signals that almost everyone ignores, often writing them off as a bad mood, general tiredness, or simply the natural aging process. Today, we're going to discuss 7 of these hidden harbingers of dementia. Knowing these indicators can give you and your loved ones the most precious gift of all: time. Time to act. So please stay with us, because the information in this video could truly change everything. Before we dive into those specific warning signs, let's quickly clarify exactly what dementia is. It's crucial to understand that dementia is not a single specific disease. It's an umbrella term, much like the term heart disease. It describes a whole complex of symptoms linked to a sustained decline in cognitive function. That is, the brain's ability to think, remember, and reason. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, but there are many others. The key difference between dementia and ordinary age-related forgetfulness is that these changes must be severe enough to interfere with daily life. Forgetting where you put your spectacles is normal, but forgetting what spectacles are actually for, that's when we need to pay closer attention. We will be focusing specifically on these deeper, less obvious changes. So let's look at the first crucial red flag, the one that often goes unmentioned. That is the subtle yet persistent shift in personality. Imagine this: your father, who was always so calm and level-headed, suddenly becomes suspicious. He might accuse the neighbours of nicking his papers, or constantly snap at everyone for no real reason. Or perhaps the reverse: your energetic, sociable mother suddenly retreats into herself, becoming timid, anxious, and fearful. We are often quick to excuse this kind of behaviour. We blame stress, or life's trials, or just dismiss it as the dreaded, grumpy old age syndrome. But that is a crucial mistake. A person's character is built over decades. It is the very core of who they are. If that core starts to inexplicably change, it could be signalling structural shifts taking place deep within the brain. This is much more than just a bad mood. It can be a genuine cry for help from the brain, where the frontal lobes, which manage our self-control and social conduct, are beginning to falter. This is an incredibly important marker, and it often appears much earlier than many of the other common symptoms. Let's take a common example. Picture someone who, for years, was the absolute life and soul of the party, always hosting, always surrounded by people, loving a good, noisy get-together. Then, slowly but surely, they start backing away from social occasions. First, they miss the big celebrations. Then they skip the casual gatherings with old friends, and eventually they stop picking up the phone altogether. The family often thinks, he's just worn out. Perhaps he just fancies a bit of peace and quiet. But actually, the avoidance might be happening because he's finding it increasingly difficult to follow the thread of conversation, or to quickly find the right words, or even to land a joke properly. Social interaction is a genuinely complex mental workout, and when the brain struggles with that intense effort, the path of least resistance, the easiest escape, is simply isolation. So if you notice a loved one who was once an extrovert suddenly turning into a real homebody or a recluse for no obvious reason, please don't just shrug it off. Try to gently probe for the real cause, because there may be something far more serious going on underneath than just a simple preference for solitude. It is absolutely crucial to distinguish these kinds of personality shifts from simple depression or just having a low day. While depression can certainly lead to apathy and social withdrawal, the personality changes associated with conditions like dementia are often far stranger and more unpredictable. For instance, a person might suddenly become excessively trusting and hand over money to scammers, even if they have been meticulous and cautious their entire life. Or they may start acting disinhibited, making inappropriate jokes or violating the personal space of others. This behaviour occurs because the specific areas of the brain that act as our internal moral compass and sensor are the ones being affected. The person is not becoming bad. They are simply losing the ability to correctly assess social norms and the true consequences of their actions. If you notice behaviour that is deeply out of character for the individual, this should be treated as a serious cause for concern and warrants a consultation with a specialist, rather than being met with judgment. The second, and arguably the most distressing sign for those around them, is the gradual erosion of empathy. Empathy, the ability to truly understand, share, and connect with another person's feelings, is the very cornerstone of our social relationships. Now try to imagine that crucial ability beginning to fade. Your loved one, someone who was always so caring and sensitive, suddenly seems distant, perhaps even cold, indifferent to your troubles, or in some cases, genuinely harsh. For instance, you might open up about something deeply important, sharing your worries and feelings, only to be met with a blank look or an outburst of irritation. They might say something truly hurtful and genuinely not notice the pain they have caused you. Crucially, this isn't because they have stopped loving you. It may be linked to the atrophy or wasting away of specific regions of the brain responsible for emotional intelligence. It literally becomes physically difficult for them to read your emotions, whether that is through your facial expressions or the tone of your voice. Let me tell you a true story. The wife of one patient explained that she had always thought her husband was the most caring man in the world. If she was unwell, he wouldn't leave her bedside. But one day, she severely cut her hand in the kitchen. The blood was streaming, and she was crying out of pain and fear. But he just stood there, watching with complete indifference. Then he simply asked when dinner would be ready. It was a ghastly shock to her. She immediately assumed he had become a hardened, selfish man. It was only months later, after other symptoms began to show, that doctors explained this was one of the early indicators of frontotemporal dementia. His brain had simply stopped processing those signals of alarm, pain, or need for help, coming from his closest companion. So, if you are confronted with sudden emotional coldness, try not to jump to conclusions or take offence immediately. It truly could be a symptom of an underlying illness. How do you distinguish this from just ordinary callousness or plain selfishness? The key word here is change. If someone has been self-centered and not particularly empathetic their entire life, that's simply who they are. It's a character trait. But if we are talking about someone who was always your rock, who knew how to comfort you and offer support, and suddenly that capability vanishes, just as if a switch has been flicked off, that is a serious warning sign. Look carefully at their reaction to events that used to provoke a strong emotional response. For instance, joyful news like the birth of a grandchild, or conversely, tragic or upsetting news. If their response is flat, inappropriate, or entirely missing, that is definitely a cause for concern. This loss of empathy can devastate families and relationships because loved ones often feel betrayed and completely misunderstood. But it is crucial to remember that this isn't rooted in malice or bad intent, but in a biological process that is causing damage to the brain itself. The third major red flag we often miss is a sudden struggle with managing money or planning things properly, and I don't mean just forgetting to pay a single utility bill. We're talking about something much more fundamental. Take, for instance, a person who has always been meticulous with the household budget, down to the penny, suddenly making strange or completely illogical purchases. They might buy 3 identical vacuum cleaners in a single week, or perhaps throw all their hard-earned savings into a shady financial scheme they would have scoffed at years ago. Another sign is struggling with tasks that require multiple steps. Things like cooking a complicated dinner, using a new recipe, planning a short holiday, or even simply figuring out how to use a new television remote control suddenly feel like overwhelming obstacles. This happens because dementia doesn't just damage memory, it also impacts what we call the brain's executive functions. Things like planning ahead, using logic, abstract thinking, and working out the consequences of our actions. Think about a ship's captain. To keep their vessel successfully on course, they must do more than simply remember the map. They need to be able to plot the exact route, factor in the weather and the speed of the current, and coordinate the entire crew. Our brain operates in much the same way. Managing our finances or planning a complicated project is essentially our internal system plotting a complex route. A person in the early stages of dementia might clearly remember they need to pay the electric bill, but the sequence of necessary steps, logging into the online bank, entering the reference number, confirming the payment, can break down into isolated, unconnected fragments. They might get stalled at one stage, abandon the effort completely, and later have no recollection of even attempting the task. That is why, if you notice that a loved one has begun accumulating unpaid bills, has fallen victim to financial scams, or is struggling severely with a task that was once straightforward for them, it is crucial to understand that this is not a sign of laziness or simple negligence. Instead, it may signal that their inner captain is losing control of the navigation system. Let's move on to the fourth warning sign, which is one that really puts people in a spin. This is about vision problems that have nothing to do with the eyes themselves. Someone goes to the eye doctor and the specialist confirms, "Your eyes are absolutely fine. You've got 20/20 vision." But the patient complains that they can't read properly, they keep bumping into things, and they struggle to judge distances. For example, they might put a cup down and completely miss the table, or they struggle walking downstairs because the steps seem to merge into one flat surface. This is a very sneaky symptom because both the person and their family members look for the problem in the eyes, when actually the problem is entirely in the brain. Huge parts of the brain, mainly the areas located in the back called the occipital lobes, are responsible for processing all that visual information. When these areas are affected by dementia, the brain simply stops correctly interpreting the signals that those perfectly healthy eyes are sending up. Let's try and picture this with an analogy. Imagine your eyes are a camera, and the brain is the computer that processes all the images coming in. Now, if the camera lens is perfectly fine, but the computer's graphics processor has failed, or conked out, as we might say, you'd see a terribly distorted picture, strange glitches, or perhaps nothing at all. That's exactly what happens in the case of dementia. Someone with dementia can physically see an object, yet they often can't recognize it. They might look straight at a telephone, for example, and not grasp what it is or what purpose it serves. Another common issue is struggling severely with contrast perception. A white plate on a white tablecloth, for instance, might become practically invisible to them. Now, another very frequent sign is struggling with spatial orientation, even within a place they know intimately, like their own home. They might get completely lost just walking from the living room to the kitchen. It's important to stress that this isn't a memory issue. It's not that they've forgotten the route. It's fundamentally a problem with spatial perception. The brain is simply unable to construct that necessary three-dimensional model of the world around it. This symptom is particularly hazardous, primarily because it significantly increases the risk of falls and serious injuries. A person might trip over what seems like perfectly flat ground, simply because their brain is miscalculating the distance to the floor. They might also suffer nasty burn because they couldn't accurately gauge how close they were to a hot cooker hob. Those around them might assume they have merely become clumsy or inattentive. But the reality is they are living in a world of distorted visual images, where straight lines appear curved and distances shift constantly. If your loved one complains about strange visual issues, yet the ophthalmologist can find no underlying problem, that is the clear signal to consult a neurologist immediately. This specific type of visual disturbance can be characteristic, for instance, of Lewy body dementia, or posterior cortical atrophy, PCA, which is a lesser-known form of Alzheimer's disease. Please do not dismiss these complaints. They could genuinely be signs of a very serious underlying problem. The fifth subtle warning sign, often dismissed as simple laziness or just a touch of depression, is profound apathy and a complete loss of initiative. This isn't just a low mood or being temporarily tired. It's a deep, pervasive indifference to everything that once brought them pleasure or had meaning. The person who adored gardening stops going out to their patch. The keen fisherman won't even touch his rods anymore. The lifelong knitter puts down her needles and wool. And when you ask why, they can't give you a clear answer. It's just, I can't be bothered, or haven't got the energy, or simply, what's the point? They might sit for hours in their favourite chair, staring into space, or endlessly flick through the television channels without actually watching anything. They stop initiating any activity whatsoever. To get them to do anything, you have to constantly prompt and guide them. This is one of the most common, yet most frequently overlooked symptoms of dementia. So how exactly does this differ from clinical depression? With depression, a person certainly loses interest in their hobbies too, but they are usually experiencing intense negative emotions, deep sadness, despair, feelings of guilt, and hopelessness. Crucially, they suffer because of how they feel. With apathy linked to dementia, however, these emotions may be completely absent. The person isn't actually sad. They simply don't care. They're quite empty inside, emotionally speaking. This is down to damage in the frontal lobes of the brain, which control our motivation, our ability to set goals, and our willpower. Imagine your car has run out of petrol. All the mechanics are fine, the engine, the wheels, the steering. It's all there. But the car won't move because there is no fuel. There is no energy to get going. Apathy in dementia is exactly this empty fuel tank of motivation. The person is physically capable of doing things, but they lack the internal drive, that crucial impulse, to start doing them. They simply lose the ability to occupy themselves. Why is this so crucial to catch? Because apathy leads to a rapid decline in function. The brain, much like any muscle, needs constant exercise. When someone stops showing interest in things, reading, socializing, or even tackling simple daily tasks, their cognitive functions deteriorate at an alarming rate. Social isolation and a lack of mental stimulation only exacerbate the problem. Relatives often make the understandable mistake of thinking, well, if he doesn't want to, leave him be. He's earned his rest. But in this particular case, rest is the enemy. Instead of allowing someone to settle into their apathetic state, we need to gently but persistently engage them in activities they can manage. Even simple things, a walk together, doing a crossword puzzle, or helping to prepare a meal, can provide that spark. They can prevent the brain's engine from stalling completely. Crucially, do not mistake apathy for simple laziness. It is a symptom of a wider condition, one that we absolutely can and must address. The sixth sign, which might just look like a strange little habit, is repetitive or compulsive behaviour. They might start asking the same question over and over, even if you've literally just answered it. Or perhaps they tell you the same old stories from the past 10 times in one evening. This can also manifest in actions, constantly moving things from one spot to another, pacing aimlessly around the room, fiddling with the same item in their hands, or folding and unfolding napkins. Sometimes this can escalate into hoarding, where they start bringing unnecessary items home from outside and refuse point blank to throw them away. From the outside, you might see this as simple eccentricity, or perhaps them being deliberately difficult. But actually, this behaviour is often the brain's way of trying to cope with rising anxiety and confusion. Repeating a familiar action creates an illusion of control and order in a world that is becoming increasingly bewildering and frightening. Let's take a closer look, shall we? Why exactly does this pattern emerge? The most common reason, number one, is usually a failure of short-term memory. Someone might ask you a question, you give them the answer, but the information simply doesn't stick. A moment later, they ask the exact same thing, genuinely believing they are hearing it for the first time. Secondly, it could be related to damage in the areas of the brain responsible for switching tasks. The brain essentially gets stuck on a particular thought or action, much like a needle stuck on a record player, and it can't transition to the next thing naturally. This specific behaviour is known as perseveration. And thirdly, as we touched on earlier, It can simply be a self-soothing mechanism. When the world feels confusing or perhaps a little hostile, a repetitive rhythmic action, like rocking back and forth or perhaps fiddling with worry beads, can really help to bring down stress levels. It's exactly the same idea as a small child sucking their thumb when they feel worried or afraid. How should we handle this? The worst thing you can do is get cross, raise your voice, or snap back with, "You've asked me that 100 times already." That just makes the person feel more anxious and confused, and it can sometimes trigger aggression. Remember, they are not doing this intentionally just to wind you up or test your patience. The best approach is gentle distraction and redirection. If they ask the same question, just answer them calmly one more time. Then, try to move the conversation onto a different topic altogether. Suggest putting the kettle on, look through some old photographs together, or maybe put on their favourite piece of music. If they are stuck on a repetitive action, try to engage them in a different, more meaningful task that uses the same kind of physical movement. For example, if they are fiddling endlessly with a piece of paper or a napkin, try giving them a ball of wool and asking them to wind it up for you. The key is not to fight the behaviour itself, but to understand the underlying need and channel that energy into something much more positive and constructive. And finally, the seventh sign, which is often quite unexpected and relates back to our basic survival instincts, involves sharp changes in eating habits. This is primarily concerned with an intense craving for sweet things. Someone who has perhaps been indifferent to desserts their whole life might suddenly start consuming vast quantities of sweets, cakes, and chocolate. They might even hide these treats, eating them in secret. Or you might notice them adding sugar to foods where it simply doesn't belong, perhaps stirring it into soup or adding it to a salad. Now, this isn't just a quirky gastronomic whim. Scientists link this behaviour to a combination of physiological factors. Firstly, with certain types of dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease, the areas of the brain responsible for regulating satiety, that feeling of being full, and controlling appetite can atrophy. Essentially, the person simply loses the ability to stop eating. Secondly, the perception of taste itself changes. Everyday food might begin to taste bland, and only an extremely sweet or extremely salty flavour manages to register and provide any sense of satisfaction. But it's not just a craving for sweets you might notice. There can be other, far stranger things happening. For instance, someone might start eating things that aren't food. This dangerous condition is called pica. They might try to eat things like soap, soil from a houseplant, or even a washing up sponge. This happens because the brain stops correctly recognizing objects and what they are actually meant for. The entire routine of eating can also drastically change. A person might forget how to properly use cutlery and start eating meals with their hands. They might forget they've already had a meal, demanding food again just 5 minutes after sitting down for lunch. Conversely, they might lose all interest in food, either because they no longer feel hunger or they simply forget that eating is necessary. All these changes can lead to very serious problems, including sudden weight gain or dangerous weight loss, an increased risk of choking, or complications like diabetes. This is why any major or unexplained shift in eating habits should always raise an alarm bell. It's crucial to understand this. These changes aren't the result of your relative being spoiled or simply displaying bad behaviour. They are a direct symptom of a brain condition. If your elderly loved ones suddenly start surviving only on sweets, avoid scolding them or trying to fight them for the treats. All that achieves is conflict. Instead, focus on substituting those unhealthy sweets with better alternatives: fresh fruit, berries, dried fruit, or even sugar-free fruit snacks. Offer food more frequently, but always in small portions. If they are having trouble using cutlery, prepare meals that are easy to manage by hand, things like small meatballs, vegetable sticks, or other finger foods. And the most crucial point, prioritise kitchen safety. Make sure that household chemicals and other non-edible items are kept well out of easy reach. Remember, changes in eating habits aren't just a quirky phase. They are an important diagnostic sign, an aspect that absolutely requires your careful attention and supervision to help maintain your loved one's overall health and well-being. So, let's recap everything we've covered today. We looked at those 7 subtle, non-obvious signs that might indicate the onset of dementia. That list included noticeable personality changes, a loss of empathy, struggles with managing finances and planning, vision problems that aren't actually eye-related, increased apathy and loss of initiative, repetitive behaviours, and finally, those sudden shifts in eating habits. As you can see, this is far more complicated than just simple forgetfulness. These symptoms can be quite sneaky, as they are so easily put down to something else entirely. But now you have the knowledge. The most important thing to remember is this. If you notice one or more of these signs in yourself or someone close to you, please don't panic, and certainly don't try to diagnose it yourself. However, it is just as crucial not to ignore them either. This is simply a reason to speak to your doctor, your GP, a neurologist, or a psychiatrist as quickly as possible. Early diagnosis won't cure the condition, but it will allow you to start therapy in a timely manner. This therapy can potentially slow down its progression, significantly improve quality of life, and give you and your family precious time to prepare and adapt to the changes ahead. Thank you so much for watching this important video right to the end. If you found this information helpful, please do give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and please do share in the comments section if you have encountered these types of changes in your own family or loved ones. Your personal story could genuinely help someone else avoid missing a critical window of time. Look after yourselves and take good care of your nearest and dearest.